that believe that language determines the content of culture. Now, all anthropologists and sociologists believe the minimum, that you can't have a sophisticated culture without a sophisticated language. But they go even farther and say language itself determines, at least in some cases, the content, the structure of culture. So, I think it was Wark, but it might have been Sapir, who was an expert in Eskimo culture, what we would now call Inuit culture, and spoke the language fluently, and was fascinated by the culture and the impact of the language on that culture. Because in Inuit, there were over 30 separate words for snow. There was lili snow that was good for making igloos out of, lub snow that was good for hunting seals on it. I'm making this stuff up, but that's the kind of stuff he's talking about. He believed that a child, at the moment it was being taught a language, was having its brain programmed, much like we program a computer, by inserting a set of instructions. Remember, a computer is just a set of electrical connections. You insert the software into that computer, that turns that computer into a game, into a spreadsheet, into a word processing program. The brain is much like that computer. It's just a set of, in many cases, electrical connections that when you insert a language into it, it programs it to pay attention, in this case, for example, to snow. It's saying, look at the fine granularity of snow. Look at the subtle shades of difference between white snow and blue-white snow. Look at the moisture content of snow. 30 words is programming that brain of that child from the very get-go. The minute it begins to speak, to look at snow differently than you and I are capable of. Because in English, how many words do we have for snow? One. And so we only see one thing, cold and white. Okay, all right, I know. I mean, maybe in English there's more than one kind of snow. Okay, there's snow, and then there's yellow snow, and you know you do not eat yellow snow. Otherwise than that, we've got one word. We don't see snow the same way that Eskimo child sees it. Language is determining the content of culture. That's the superior Warp hypothesis. Language determines the content of culture. Let me give you a more sustained example. This is an interesting one. A number of years ago, following the tradition of Sapir and Ward, an anthropologist got the bright idea to try and explain the origins of democracy in the modern period. Now, the modern period means within the last 500 years. Going back classically, thousands of years, democracy, as many of you may know, originated in Greece. Okay. But the modern period, anybody know where democracy first appeared? The first rudimentary forms of democracy. What country?
France?
No. Nope. Here's the hint. The country that devised the Magna Carta.
Britain.
Britain. Very good. Britain. The second major country to follow along and create the second major document of modern democracy created the, see, you get this one right, you better. What country produced the Bill of Rights? The United States. Okay. Okay. What do those two countries share in common? English. And that is why these folks argue that the English-speaking world got democracy first. Because, for example, let me show you the distinction. They talk about pronouns, the power of pronouns to create democracy. That is the power of language to determine the content of culture. Let's start off with Spanish, because that's the one that most people will know on this classroom. Two, what does that mean?
You.
Okay. But then, what does that mean? You. What? What is this?
Your.
The informal. What is this? The formal. Okay? Now, in French, they've got almost the same thing. In Italian, does anybody know Italian? I have no idea. In German, it's du, it's sie. In Russian, I have no idea. They call it borscht and vodka. In Portuguese, blah, blah, blah. And we get over here to English. They have 2 words. We have 1. And that's why we got democracy first. No, I mean, this is exactly the argument. I think it's fascinating. How come? Think of it. How come you can make a case that with one, what is it, the second person pronoun? I'm not the English major. The second person pronoun, lacking the distinction between the formal and informal, might predetermine a culture to produce democracy. How come?
Everybody's equal.
Yeah.
Everybody's equal.
Exactly. Who do you use the informal with?
Friends, family,
People who are your social equals. Who do you use the formal with?
Social
Elderly,
betters.
powerful figures,
professors.
professors,
People of a higher social level.
people of a higher social standing. That means anytime you are about to address another human being, you must make a distinction. Equal, unequal, equal, unequal, equal, unequal, until you get here to English where we are all created equal. At any moment, you're about to turn to somebody else in a restaurant and you want to borrow the salt. If you're speaking Spanish, no, Portuguese, Spanish, you have to say decide. You tú usted. Okay, but in English, you just say you. I think this is a really cool explanation. It was devised by some very bright people. Do I think it's true? No. But I think it's an interesting explanation. Let's do a little exercise in critical thinking. What's wrong with this as an explanation? What's wrong with it? Yeah.
It doesn't have like all the variables from like the Industrial Revolution, the resources.
Yeah, it leaves all that stuff. Okay, it's a little more complicated than this, but does this logic still stand in spite of the complexity? That's the argument. Okay, criticize it. What's wrong with it?
Too vague?
Because there may be other languages that are more, or have more
Okay.
use and stuff like that.
Let's stick with this one, though. Stick with English. Yeah, you're starting to head in the right direction. It's true, we don't use the second person pronoun to make that distinction. But we use what?
Sir.
Bango. Bango? Bingo. Okay. It's also early in the morning for me. Okay, bingo, because we'll use sir or ma'am. You turn to somebody else in that restaurant. Excuse me, sir. Superior status. We just have to use a different word for it. Some would argue, in California English, we are re-evolving the informal form. We've got you for the formal, and in California form, what do we have for the informal?
Dude.
Dude.
Dude, pass me the salt. Totally.
Okay. There's another criticism of this, and this one you may not be aware of. Could we argue we have mistaken causation for correlation? Yes. Or even that the arrow of causation is reversed. That is, instead of the single word causing democracy, could it be that democracy caused the
Single word.
because what is this? What does that mean?
You.
You.
You to a higher person.
You. Where is that? What language is that?
English.
It's English. Did we used to have the exact same distinction of Spanish, French, German, Russian, Portuguese, Italian in English? That we had a formal and informal use of the second person pronoun? Yes, we did. Thou. What kind of English is that?
Shakespeare.
Yeah, Shakespearean English. People always say it's
modern
Old
English.
English. No, it's not Old English.
It's modern
You wouldn't
English.
understand Old English. It's like a foreign language. No, we call it, the true term is it's called Elizabethan English. But most of us know it by way of the single greatest, most famous writer in the English language, which is Shakespeare. Is this the formal or informal? No. Listen to Romeo. Romeo, oh, excuse me. Listen to Juliet. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy name, forsake thy family, and I shall do the same. Juliet is crazy about this guy. Is she going to use the formal form? No, she's using the informal. That was the informal. That was the informal. But because it is now associated with Shakespeare, which you're forced to read in high school, and nobody wants to read Shakespeare, we now form it with kind of elevated culture, so we think of it as formal. Okay, any questions about the superior wharf hypothesis? Interesting set of ideas. But it is a challenging hypothesis that you need to think logically to think about criticisms. Okay, any other questions about this? I promise you it's going to be on the next quiz, and it's one of the more abstract, difficult concepts to get. Not that difficult. It's just that language determines culture. Any concerns? Okay. Well, this is in some sense, the superior wharf hypothesis is in some sense an attempt to explain the origins of culture. Not a very good one. What are better ones? We'll talk about 4 explanations for culture. Sociobiological, ecological, and functionalist and conflict theory. Okay, so let's take a look. I'll spend a little more time with the sociobiological and ecological just because we've already talked fairly extensively about functionalism and conflict theory. But be aware, they are back. Almost every single chapter in the book will have some reference to these major theories. Now, I'm not testing you on functionalism and conflict theory on this quiz 3, except for this area. But it definitely will be on the midterm and on the final. Okay, where does culture come from? A sociobiological explanation says that culture is basically an instinct. It's part of our human nature. Culture is an instinct. It is part of our human nature. In other words, you can't not do it. It's part of our hormones. As I indicated to you before, when we were talking about biological explanations for deviance, there's a lot of these explanations out there today because of the dominance of biology in modern science, because of the sequencing of the human gene. Remember, discovering more and more human activities do have a biological, at least, component to them. That is, we're being pushed by our hormones, pushed by that extra Y chromosome we discussed previously, pushed by our genetics. If you have an alcoholic parent, are you more likely to become alcoholic yourself? Yes, that's a social biological explanation. Culture the same way. As I just described, can very sophisticated patterns of behavior be an instinct? Yeah, things like migration and birth, yeah, they can be very, very sophisticated. An instinct doesn't have to be simple, though it sometimes is. But often these sociobiological explanations focus on, 1, cultural universals. A cultural universal, and you should be familiar with that term. What is cultural? A cultural universal means what? It's pretty simple. Yeah. Right.
Something that you can find in all cultures
all
across the world.
Not most. All cultures.